This is my video about how good protection is in every card game. Protection effects. Protection effects in most card games typically are some sort of ability that stops your card from being either affected or targeted by specific instances of effects of other cards. In Magic, we have the protection mechanic, which stops your card from being affected by cards of a certain color or type, depending on what sort of protection your card has. Mirror Crusader, for example, has protection from black or green spells and creatures. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, a card like Qliphort Towers here has the ability to be unaffected by spell trap effects and by monsters effects, meaning that this card is immune to all of those types of cards and being targeted or stopped by any of those kind of effects. In Hearthstone, they attempt to use this elusive keyword, which makes it so that way your card cannot be targeted by spells or hero powers, forming as a sort of block against those style of effects. And in Pokemon, typically abilities or item cards will say prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by blank, whether or not that is Pokemon with special abilities, or in this Panic Mask case, Pokemon that have 40 or less HP remaining. All of these abilities are typically there to prevent important removal tactics from your opponent from affecting your specific cards, being an important counter action that you can take to stop all of your guys from just dying to easily spammed kill spells. But my question is, how good are these effects actually at protecting your monsters, and how good are they in each card game exactly? But if you want to help protect yourself and your online data, you should take a look at this video's sponsor, NordVPN. If, like me, you find yourself traveling out to a lot of card tournaments, you will often end up connecting to many public Wi-Fis at different airports or hotels that you may be staying at to get info on cards or the latest tournament times. However, these Wi-Fis can often find themselves vulnerable to hackers that may use it to gain access to your data or give your device malware. Using NordVPN, you can gain confidence that when you are connecting to public Wi-Fis, your device will remain safe when you're out and on the go. NordVPN can also help you when you're looking for trips. Connecting to different servers, Nord can help you find cheaper deals on flights and hotels, saving you money, as hotels and flights may charge differently based on your location. NordVPN will help obscure your location and give you options to get deals from all over the world, saving you money. If that sounds good to you, click my link in the description to get a discount on NordVPN, and thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. So first, with Magic the Gathering, they have the protection mechanic that I spoke of earlier. On Progenitus here, we can see that it has protection from everything, meaning that it cannot be targeted or blocked or affected by cards that have any text on them whatsoever. So how good is protection in Magic on its creature cards? And the answer is, in Magic, the ability is super duper strong. A super staple card that I see tons of play, like Mother of Runes here, allows you to give any card in your play protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, which includes Mother of Runes itself, meaning that this card can effectively blank any removal spell or any creature that it wants at any time. Having protection from a specific effect pairs two very powerful effects that are already good individually but become super powerful when combined in Magic. One of the abilities is indestructibility, meaning that your card cannot be destroyed or stopped by any card that has whatever the protection you are from, meaning that you can go into combat with absolute glee as your creature is super duper safe. The other one is hexproof, meaning that if your card would be targeted by destroy effects or exile effects, you can still use protection effects to get around those, as the spells simply do not work if you have protection from the spell's color. This is why on almost every single card with protection, you'll see some sort of limitation. Progenitus costs an enormous 10 mana of 5 different colors, meaning that you can't cast it very easily. Mother of Runes requires a tap, meaning that you can only use its protection effect once per turn, and so on. Almost every form of protection is limited because of how powerful this effect is to give to one of your creatures. Because of how strong this effect is in Magic, a lot of the creatures and cards are fairly frustrating when they have this effect on them. When protection is a static effect in Magic, these hard-to-out cards become extreme pain points, especially for new players, but for veteran players alike. A card like Slippery Boggle, which just has hexproof, means that even though this creature is only a 1/1, anything that powers it up turns it into a massive hard-to-deal-with threat. Heliod the Sun Crown, for example, is an indestructible enchantment, which makes it super duper hard to remove unless you have an extremely specific answer to get rid of it, and being a combo piece, this is a card you'll definitely want to get rid of when it's on the board. Both of these cards need extremely specific answers to deal with them, and because they are both prominent win cons in decks that they are played in, it means that it can be extremely frustrating when you have an answer that would normally work on most Magic cards that does not work on these two creatures because of their keywords. This has led in the future years to Magic using soft protection effects a lot more than the super hard stuck protection effects, just like indestructible or hexproof, that are always on a creature all the time. Seen from one of the more recent sets, a card like Dawn's Truce here gives your creatures both indestructible and hexproof if you would like. However, it only gives it to them to the end of turn, making this effect annoying for a single turn, as you cannot do anything to stop your opponent from attacking in with those creatures on that turn. However, it does also wear off, meaning that it doesn't blank your removal spells for the rest of the game. This also helps cushion the unfair feeling of losing to a hexproof or indestructible or protection card that would come with normally being a protection card. A card like Patchwork Automaton has Ward 2, meaning that you can get around its protection mechanic if you pay an additional 2 mana. Meaning that in a normal game, if this card just had hexproof, you would be out of luck in terms of answering it, but because of the Ward 2, if you just wait a few more turns, you will be able to answer this problematic card. It still provides protection for the player who plays it down, meaning that it won't just go away immediately, but it doesn't completely block out answers from your opponent if they need to answer the card to win the game. Now for Yu-Gi-Oh! So in Yu-Gi-Oh!, a card like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon has an absolute ton of protection effects. If you look at it, it cannot be destroyed by card effects, and it cannot be targeted by card effects. So how good is protection from different card effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! It turns out that these protection effects are not as good as they would seem on the surface. This doesn't mean the effects aren't good ever. If we look at Cleafort Towers here, they're called Towers effects for these kind of cards, a card that is a big beater that cannot be removed by traditional effects. These cards typically can be somewhat strong depending on the metagame that they are present in and what kind of answers there are in the format. Another reason for this is also that protection effects in the early days and lower power levels of Yu-Gi-Oh! Tended to be much stronger. I specifically remember a card like Marshmallow seeing a ton of play as just a card that cannot be destroyed by battle, similar to many other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history. Having protection is really good when it is hard to remove cards of certain types. And though these effects are strong at protecting against the specific abilities that they are targeting, like battle or spell effects, it does not mean that your card is safe from being removed by common removal effects in the metagame. There's no example in my mind better than this than Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon. This card looks like it can be really hard to remove as it cannot be destroyed by battle easily, and it cannot be destroyed by opponent's card effects. However, this card can still be defeated in many ways, meaning that its protection ends up falling a bit flat. And this leads to protection effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Being somewhat well balanced over the game's lifespan. Typically, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, if a card has a lot of protection attached to it, it also has a massive cost, meaning that the card really has to not be removed by anything in the game for you to stay in the game. A card like Quintet Magician or Raid Rapper Ultimate Falcon are both cards which have a large ability and a huge body, but require many, many monsters to come out onto the field, meaning that they need that protection to really pay off if they are going to do anything in the game. Other powerful cards with protection effects like Great Magnus here or Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King, all have abilities that protect themselves, but also have other abilities to impact the game outside of their generic protection effects against spells and traps. And this gets to the general point in Yu-Gi-Oh! That you would rather disrupt your opponent's plans than stop them from using their plans altogether with your monster's protection abilities in Yu-Gi-Oh! While the protection effects do make these cards harder to out in a generic sense, the fact that they can disrupt your opponent at the same time really puts them over the edge in terms of stopping your opponent from outing your big boss monster. Because of the power level of many of Yu-Gi-Oh's cards and the interlocking mechanics between tributing your opponent's monsters to destroying them with board-wide clears, it is generally better to stifle your opponent's plans, stopping them from being able to get over your monsters, rather than have a monster that is extremely difficult to get over on its own. This is generally how Yu-Gi-Oh is played, and why protection effects don't see as much play as you would see in other card games. Now for Hearthstone. So in Hearthstone, we have a card like Evasive Feywing, which can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, which would later be keyworded to the elusive keyword. So if you see elusive, it basically just means your card cannot be targeted by any spells or hero powers. So how good is this protection mechanic in Hearthstone? And the answer is that it is rather weak. Even in the early days of Hearthstone, when removal was really common and played a lot, generally these minions needed a lot of extra help to actually end up doing anything. Because of the fact that they can't be targeted by spells, it means that you can't buff your own guy easily, meaning that it is really hard to get it to do more than its default amount of damage, and really hard to build your entire deck around. Typically, this means that elusive cards generally needed other mechanics or effects on the card to actually be strong and see any amount of play. A card like Stone Drake not only has elusive, but also has Divine Shield, Taunt, and Lifesteal, making it more of a roadblock and something your opponent has to think about getting through. As of the recent set, we got another taunt elusive minion in Tortola, which is a 130, meaning that it has a massive body and is hard to get through, cannot be killed by traditional removal thanks to elusive, and cannot be attacked past thanks to the taunt. It also buffs its own attack and gives you some armor whenever it receives damage, meaning that this card is one actual example of elusive being used for its intended purpose. Despite this, most elusive minions tend to be mostly just annoying roadblocks for your opponent rather than an actual strategy to help you win the game, which is why over the course of Hearthstone's lifespan, these cards are printed rather infrequently, being cards that are usually meant to be a speed bump but aren't a core part of many strategies. However, Hearthstone does have some strategies that protect their own minions, which end up becoming very oppressive and very core to the way the game is played. And this main mechanic ends up being stealth. As you can see on the card Conceal here, it gives your minions stealth until your next turn, which effectively protects your minions for one turn from any form of targeting or being attacked by your opponent's minions. This helps to set up game-ending combos with the use of almost any minion that can do either a lot of damage or give you several card advantage spurts on cards. A card like Edwin Van Cleef in original Hearthstone had stealth by default and made itself really, really large, meaning that on one turn you could play down Edwin, stealth it with Conceal or with its own ability, and then you would be able to one-shot your opponent on the next turn with an extremely large minion. Similarly, Finja the Flying Star was a minion you could play down that gets 2 Murlocs out of your deck to help you set up for Murloc combos, and because of the stealth keyword, your opponent has very little recourse in terms of actually stopping Finja from tutoring those Murlocs from your deck. This really pushes the edge of what's fair to do with protection mechanic, as stealth completely protects your minions from almost every form of removal besides from board clears in Hearthstone, meaning that even cards that are relatively fair with the mechanic, if they are powerful enough, will see tons of play and typically be very unfair to play against. As seen most recently on the Virus module, which is an attachment that you can put on Zilliax 3000, you can make a very large Zilliax minion that was not only reborn, as you got 2 copies, elusive, so it could not be targeted by assaults, but also stealth on the first turn, meaning not only would you get a guaranteed free attack once, you would get it a second time because of when the reborn effect goes off, you regain the stealth keyword, meaning that you would get several attacks from a large minion at basically no way of your opponent stopping you from doing such a thing. It's clear that the Hearthstone designers initially wanted stealth to be a kind of sneaky rogue mechanic to sneak in additional damage to your opponent. However, when stealth is combined with either large minions or large combos, it became a big problem for Hearthstone, which is a lot of the reason why most protection effects in Hearthstone are either temporary or shied away from in general, as this mechanic really leaves a sour taste in your mouth when you get one-shot by a stealth minion. And now for Pokemon. So in Pokemon, typically Pokemon will have abilities that block certain types of attacks. For example, Mimikyu's Safeguard ability here stops attacks from EX and V Pokemon. So how good is the protection effect of Mimikyu in Pokemon? The answer is that it is great in off-meta strategies and helps to enable stall decks altogether. If we look at Mimikyu and Ogerpon EX, both of these cards have abilities to prevent all damage from attacks coming from specific Pokemon with either abilities or with rules boxes such as EX or V Pokemon. In this way, if you set up your deck correctly, you can play around these abilities to stop your opponent from doing any meaningful damage to most of the Pokemon on your board, forming a stall deck where your opponent will have no choice but to draw through their entire deck and lose as you set up an unbreakable board of protection effects. And while these more niche strategies take advantage of the fact that they can block damage with their Pokemon's abilities, the generic protection provided is also beneficial to many more normal, traditional style of decks. A card like Manaphy, for example, prevents all damage done to your bench Pokemon, which not only helps protect your bench against specific snipe attacks from decks that want that kind of ability, but also is just a generic good card to have against any random deck that may have some ability to deal damage to your bench Pokemon. These types of protection effects can also be specific tools for specific decks. If they need a specific deck that reduces an opponent's Pokemon to low HP, a card like Panic Mask can really come invaluable for making your opponent's attacks unable to do anything after you reduce all their Pokemon to a very low HP amount. In this way, these strategies can thrive when they otherwise wouldn't, thanks to these powerful protection effects, giving you more options as a player to stop your opponent from just overwhelming you with sheer force. Speaking of protection in Pokemon, though, I have to talk about my favorite Pokemon that is well known for having protection abilities in the game, Shedinja. The original Shedinja card here prevents all damage done by your opponent's evolved Pokemon and Pokemon EX, blanking a large part of the game entirely. However, this Shedinja is also still weak to basic Pokemon attacks, so in future Shedinjas, they would pivot to another type of stopping, which is the ability to have prize card reduction on your Pokemon. This Shedinja, with his Vessel of Life ability, allows you to discard cards attached to it and attach it to one of your Pokemon as a Poke Tool card when it is knocked out, meaning that your opponent does not take the prize card they normally would for knocking out your Shedinja. These prize card reduction style effects are very dangerous to put into the game of Pokemon and have definitely seen their fair share of abuse with cards like Lily's Pokédoll here. This card is a card that you can play up to 4 of in your deck and doesn't give a prize card when it's knocked out, meaning that if you can queue up Pokédoll after Pokédoll, your opponent will have an extremely hard time taking any prize cards over those turns, as these Pokemon just sit in the slot and soak up damage for you. Being able to reuse this ability 4 times in a game is already quite detrimental, but when you see a large reuse of prize card reduction, it can get to games where even if you could knock out a Pokemon every turn, you would still not be able to win. The biggest example of this is the Life Dew Trainer card, which is a Poke tool that makes it so that way your Pokemon gives 1 less prize card when knocked out. Because it is a simple trainer card that can be attached to any Pokemon in the game, you can simply recycle this card over and over again as many times as you want, and your opponent will struggle to take any prize cards no matter how hard they try to attack into your board. Whilst I was generally a fan of the abilities that stop your opponents from attacking in, as these can be general metagame calls or ideas that you have to combat a powerful metagame staple deck, these decks, which simply focus on doing the exact same thing every game, which is stopping your opponent from taking any prize cards, are generally more toxic and something that the Pokemon Company has tried to avoid after the printing of these cards. In conclusion, after going over all of the protection effects in these games, I can see that protection is a very, very annoying mechanic to have to deal with. Whether that be in Pokemon, where your Pokemon will simply not give out any prize cards when knocked out, stopping you from winning the game, or in Magic, where you have a Hexproof creature that you have no answer to deal with that will slowly beat you to death with you having nothing to do about it, protection can be a really toxic mechanic when it is used unwisely. In general, cards needing specific answers from specific cards is a bad thing and needs to be handled with a lot of care to make it so that way the protection effects are both relevant but not super overbearing. Cards like Kaijus in Yu-Gi-Oh! Really do a good job of getting around all forms of protection as they tribute the opponent's monster, which gets around any form of targeting or protection from spells or traps, meaning that many decks will already have an answer to a specific type of protection if they want to include an easily accessible Kaiju in their deck. In this way, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the leeway to print a lot more powerful protection effects on its cards, so that way when they are protected by those effects, they have a lot more meaning, compared to Hearthstone, where a card with protection only protects it from hero powers and spells, meaning that these cards have to be kept purposely weak, as if they were too strong and your minions weren't able to deal with it, the card would run away with the game. So in general, all of the elusive style cards are kept really weak with really low power levels, meaning that you can't really do much with the cards in general. When I see a card like Manaphy from Pokemon though, I think that protection is a really important mechanic to keep in your game and is very good to help support different deck archetypes and different ways of playing the game. A card like Manaphy really helps you stop your opponent's specific strategy if they were to snipe your bench, and is a nice card to include in many lists, being a generic card that you can put into any deck to help support you against other different style of decks. After Magic had set the example of indestructible and hexproof and protection creatures that are really hard to remove, most other card games have found pretty elegant solutions to help deal with it being too strong. In Hearthstone's case, that typically is to make it relatively weak, which is a more elegant solution than making the cards overbearing and stopping you from doing anything. But in Yu-Gi-Oh's case, the very elegant solution was to have it so that way you contribute over your opponent's monsters, with Kaijus getting around most forms of protection, meaning that if you want to get around protection monsters, you can simply include this style card in your deck, and you will have a pretty blanket statement against almost any deck of that style. In general, I think Pokemon does it best with their Pokemon that have specific targeted abilities, stopping specific metagame staples from attacking through you, and specific support cards like Manaphy helping protect your bench against specific bench snipe attacks. This way you can cover yourself against large swaths of the metagame or specific parts of the metagame depending on what you want, and all you have to do is include one card with that protection style to help your entire strategy. In this way, protection both helps you and your opponent make different decisions about what style of decks you each want to play. Thanks for watching the video. Like and subscribe if you want to see more mechanics talked about in all different card games, because that's what I'm here on this channel to do. Let me know about different protection effects you can think of in the comments. I went over many, but there's many more that I had to leave out thanks to time, so let me know about them in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.